You're about to hear what no one else will say about the Diddy case. Not CNN, not the bloggers, not the influencers, all pretending that they understand the law. I'm a 20-year attorney with more experience than 99% of other lawyers. I've been in the courtroom. I sat behind the bench working for a judge. I battled prosecutors in criminal court. I sued and defended businesses in state and federal court. And today, I don't work for the system. I work for you, and I expose the system. And I'm not scared to speak honestly about the law, as I don't try cases anymore. I help entrepreneurs avoid court. So here's what you won't hear anywhere else about the Diddy case. These are the top 5 legal mistakes that the government made in the Diddy case that no one's talking about. Whether they were reckless or intentional, they're shocking. And other lawyers are either too scared to speak the truth or they just don't know the truth. This isn't about the prosecutors just losing. They handed Diddy the legal equivalent of a superpower. They gave him immunity, leverage, and a motive to expose the real crimes and corruption around this case. So this is all about trial law, the rules of procedure, rules of evidence, and strategy from someone who's fought these battles in real life and now mentors entrepreneurs so they never fall victim to legal ignorance. And I have nothing to lose. I don't work for the DA. I don't answer to a judge. And I'll explain to you what really happens behind closed doors. And you can challenge me by commenting below. So let's jump right into the top 5 mistakes that the prosecution made in Diddy's case. Let's start with mistake number 5. Now, mistake number 5 was this whole sex trafficking claim. From the beginning, the government, along with the media, painted Diddy out as this major sex trafficker, that there were minors involved, all sorts of co-defendants. He had this network, he had a ring. In the original indictment, which I reviewed, it was clear that there was only one unnamed victim in the case. It wasn't a minor. So the government initially came out painting this sex trafficking case where people were being held hostage, where there were minors involved, where there were these satanic rituals. And that's what the public initially believed. And that was the claim that the prosecutors brought forward into trial. Now, in most courtrooms, most judges, when the defense makes a motion to dismiss this count of the complaint, it should have been tossed because there really was no evidence of sex trafficking. Everything that came back from the jury was consensual, that Cassie participated, any victim participated consensually, and they're not minors. That takes away all of sex trafficking. So the prosecution knew that they had no piece of evidence really connecting Diddy to sex trafficking. Yet, they went on to charge him, indict him, impanel a jury, and take it almost all the way to verdict when they dismissed the trafficking claim before the jury got to decide. And there's a legal reason to do that. I'll explain that later, but it's not really relevant to mistake number 5. Mistake number 5 was charging him with the sex trafficking case and giving Diddy a malicious prosecution case in exchange. That's the big mistake. It's giving Diddy now the ability to sue the government for malicious prosecution for the sex trafficking claim because Diddy meets all the elements of a malicious prosecution claim. He was successful on that claim. The government actually dismissed it, so he won, which is necessary. Number 2, he suffered damages. And number 3, he can certainly show that there was malice on behalf of the government in the way they prosecute this case. And I'm going to get to that because the malice was clear, and the malice, I believe, had a gender and a race bias to it, which is not surprising by the government. So the bottom line is, mistake number 5 was charging him with sex trafficking when there really was no piece of evidence. There were no minors, everything was consensual. And the fact that the court let this go on that long and didn't dismiss this charge based on the defense's motion initially makes you wonder why the judge goes along with the prosecution, which they do, in my experience, 99% of the time. Judges and prosecutors are on the same team. If you think otherwise, you've never practiced law. They're on the same team, they look out for each other, and the judge is basically a crooked referee who's always going to take your side. So you got to know that when you practice law, when you analyze things. Mistake number 5 was giving Diddy this malicious prosecution case because now he can sue the government civilly. He can get his entire file. He can subpoena records. In a civil case, Diddy has the ability to conduct discovery. He has the ability to conduct depositions. He has the ability to gather a lot of evidence. So that's what the government gave him by charging him with sex trafficking when there was no evidence at all. So Diddy can now file a malicious prosecution case. He can get his own list, his own file, He can release that if he wants, and he can seek damages, a whole lot of money as well. So that's mistake number 5, was charging this bullshit sex trafficking when they knew there was no evidence. Court went along with it. But now because they did that, they gave Diddy a slam dunk malicious prosecution case. And this is part of Diddy's revenge. Mistake number 4 relates to mistake number 5. When you charge someone with sex trafficking and you don't dismiss that charge prior to paneling a jury and you take it up to trial, you've now created what is known as double jeopardy. You've given Diddy the constitutional right to never be tried for that charge again. Now, if the prosecution had dismissed this charge, the trafficking case, the case they knew they couldn't prove, the case they had no evidence for, the case that the judge let them continue, they had dismissed that prior to swearing in the jury, then they would be able to bring a sex trafficking case against Diddy in the future. But they didn't. They had no evidence, they knew it, but they wanted to prejudice him. They wanted to convict him. They wanted to do that with the judge and their own prosecutorial strategies, which we'll go to soon, because that's another mistake. But the point is this: they should have dismissed the trafficking case before they impaneled the jury. The fact that they impaneled the jury and then dismissed on their own gives great credence and probative value to the malicious prosecution case, that it shows they really had no case. That's why they dismissed it. They only presented to the jury, pissed them off, but at the same time, it triggers double jeopardy, which, like I said, makes Diddy Superman. Double jeopardy now attaches to Diddy, where he can no longer be ever tried by the government for these crimes because he was tried and they lost. And now he's Superman. Now he's got immunity. He's got a stronger immunity shield than the government does, because a lot of times you can't sue the government because they enjoy immunity as part of the job, and that's why they're so crooked. But the point is this: they triggered double jeopardy, and it was such an amateur move. I don't know if it was intentional, amateur, reckless. You got to assume the 8 white female prosecutors that prosecuted this case were competent enough to know that that would happen. It's pretty fundamental. I get it, and I wouldn't have made that mistake, but I'm a little different than most lawyers, right? So that's mistake number 4. Double jeopardy is so powerful. Think about this. Diddy's got all the money in the world. He can now sue the government for malicious prosecution. He can get his file. At the same time, he knows he's insulated from them because they can't sue him back. They can't come after him criminally. They can do other things, I'm sure, but they can't come after him criminally because he's got double jeopardy. Now, mistake number 3, it's pretty amateur. Other lawyers may be talking about this too. It's pretty basic for a case like this. If you're the prosecutor, always remember, burden's on you to prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt. When you have a witness like Cassie, her credibility is in question. She's been with Diddy for years. Obviously, the jury did not believe her. They didn't see her as a victim. But when you have a witness that may not be credible, that changed her story so many times, that's been involved in so many lawsuits, you need corroborating independent witnesses to present to basically corroborate what that not so credible victim may be saying. It's not just her words against Diddy. Now you have 5 other witnesses that are corroborating what's happening. So the jury makes a credibility determination now. That's more powerful because they're saying it's not just Cassie's words. We have 5 independent witnesses that are corroborating these events. Now, that's where the prosecution really failed when it came to proofs. When you have a victim that's not very credible, you need other witnesses. And it makes you wonder, did they have other witnesses and they refused to call them? And witnesses such as celebrities like DiCaprio, Colin, Obama, all these people, J-Lo, so many people that you know that are so important, that are so credible, could have been called as witnesses to corroborate Cassie. They could have been called as witnesses, and they can't get away from a criminal subpoena like that. They can plead the 5th if they're facing criminal charge, but they can't avoid coming to court and being a witness. There had to have been witnesses who saw and knew what was going on that were very credible that the state did not call, and that stated their case. Or those witnesses were not going to testify as to what the state wanted them or the government wanted them to testify. So without independent corroborating witnesses to bolster that victim who was not very credible, they lost. And think about the type of witnesses they could have had. They could have had celebrities. Any of these celebrities came walking in, and politicians, that jury's going to believe them, right? It makes you wonder why the prosecution didn't call any of these people, because so many people attend freak-offs, so many witnesses. There have to be so many witnesses to all these allegations. Not one single important person, in my opinion, was called to corroborate Cassie's testimony. Has failed. That's mistake number 3. It's really failed. And here's mistake number 2 that the prosecutors made in the Diddy case. And I've seen this throughout my entire career. When I started, I did a lot of criminal work, juvenile work, civil rights, and then I transitioned into representing business owners, doing litigation transactions, what have you. But when I represented sexual assault victims or defendants, people who were innocent at the end of the day, I always somehow dealt with a female prosecutor that was the head of the DV unit or sex crimes unit. Every county office I worked in Jersey, every case, basically a female prosecutor. And I always used to think this was so sexist. And this is what happened in the Diddy case. And these women weren't believable. We're going to get into this. But this is premised on the fact that if you're in the prosecutor's office, you know this. Women are always assigned as the head of the DV unit, the head of sex crimes, because there's a sexist mentality of the government that only women can prosecute these cases. Only women can prosecute them better than men. Women are more believable and women are more compassionate for victims. There's no penises allowed. And you're going to see this in the Diddy case. And you saw this raw, and you saw why these women were not believed. Because in Diddy's case, there were 8 white female prosecutors assigned to his case. Prosecute 8 white female prosecutors. That's insane. That's not diversity. There's no diverse thought. Those are 8 white female prosecutors and no penis allowed for strategy, for ideas. And get this, here's the other huge mistake, and here's part of the mistake. Before the 8 female white prosecutors were in charge of the prosecution, a man by the name of Damian Williams was the head of the prosecutor office. Damian Williams is a black male who resigned during Diddy's case. And he resigned quietly because of Trump or whatever they claim, but he resigned during Diddy's case. And maybe he realized that this was not a sex trafficking case. Maybe he realized that Diddy was being set up. Maybe he realized there wasn't enough evidence to convict him. Whatever the reasons, he resigned. He was the black male in charge. Who comes in now? Like typical sexist government. 8 white female prosecutors. What is their purpose? The purpose was to intimidate a jury, to make them look at the 8 white females and say, look at all of us women. You have to believe us. You have to believe Cassie because we're all women and we all lie. And we are compassionate for these women. Now, what they should have done is get independent corroborated witnesses, corroborate Cassie, not sit here and try to intimidate the jury by having 8 white female alpha prosecutors. And that was deadly. That was deadly to the prosecutor's case, the government's case, because those 8 white females were not believed. I'm sure the jury looked at them as bullies. And if you really put it together, it really questions the motive of the government here. Like, these prosecutors were either intentionally brought in, I believe, to cover something up, or they were so incompetent that they triggered malicious prosecution, that they triggered double jeopardy. Why did Damian Williams leave during this case? Why did the head of the office, the black male, leave and 8 white women get put in to prosecute Diddy? And that's a real killer, right? What makes them even less credible is Diddy's found guilty of transporting prostitutes for the benefit of Cassie. And Cassie planned, participate, knew, and it was all consensual in those prostitutes. She did everything but, I believe, pay for the transportation. So why isn't Cassie guilty of the same exact crime as Diddy? So now you brought in the 8 female prosecutors that the jury did not believe. They saw the differential treatment between the alleged victim, Cassie, and then Diddy, who they gave that verdict to, I believe, because it's the lesser included. And that's a whole other video to explain on why that verdict is the way it is, because it's transporting prostitution. Let's be honest, does anyone even think that was illegal? How many people give rides to people end up being prostitutes? Think about Miami, think about the Uber drivers. They're in big trouble. But the point is this: the 8 white superstar female prosecutors government brought in during this case caused the government to lose. It was a sexist move. It backfired, and you gotta wonder why Damian Williams reside. And the number one legal mistake, the biggest one the government made in this entire case, is they tried to sell the public a story that wasn't true, a story they couldn't prove. And that's as basic as it gets in life, business, and law. It's the first thing they teach you in law school, especially when you're doing trials. If you're going to make promises to the jury, better make sure you deliver on those promises. It's the same thing in business. What did the government promise from the beginning? Remember how sensational this whole case was? They raided his house. They found the bottles. Were there drugs in the bottles? He was a human trafficker of kids. He engaged in Satanism. He was connected to all these powerful people, had all this blackmail material. There were so many co-defendants, the whole network involved, all the media. They really made this guy a huge human trafficker, more than Epstein. That was intentional. That's the way the government portrayed him from the get-go. And when you come into trial with all that story painted out for the jury, regardless of whether or not they should know all that stuff initially or not, the jury was looking for the government to prove this story, show them this story, the sensational story, this trafficking story, the Myers, co-defendants, everything. And there was nothing there. This was a dressed up, simple assault case that would be in any DV court in America. This was the Diddy Sprenger show. That's all this was, with a very not credible victim. There were no minors, no Satanism, none of the sensational shit that the government promised and the media promised that compounded. And that's the problem with these kind of cases, is that's an expectation set by the jury. When you overpromise and underdeliver, you lose. And that's what the team of the 8 white female prosecutors did. They overpromised, they sold a story, whether it was their narrative, the government's narrative, whatever it was, it made no sense. From a litigation point of view, I knew that Diddy was going to beat this case, and I don't even think that he should be guilty of transportation of prostitutes. I don't even think that should be against the law, when in most states, prostitution's not against the law. These prostitutes are not victims. One of them was actually suing Cassie for giving him an STD, allegedly. So this is the problem with this case. And the number one legal mistake was the government selling a story that they couldn't prove. They couldn't prove from the beginning, so you don't tell the story. You never tell a story you can't prove. That's as basic as it is as a trial lawyer, as a good lawyer, good business person, and a good just all-around human being. And the prosecutors lost all credibility when they sold them a story they couldn't prove. So those are the top 5 legal mistakes that the government made in prosecuting Diddy that's just opened the door to Diddy now maybe becoming the hero, maybe not, who knows, but he can sue the government for malicious prosecution. He's got a great case. He's got double jeopardy, meaning they can't come after him criminally. So he's immune. He's like Superman. And he should take a deep dive into investigating why the government chose to have Damian Williams resign, the black male who headed the government, and then appoint 8 white female prosecutors to go after him. Just imagine if it was reversed, and there were 8 white men who were prosecuting a black woman for bringing prostitutes over to her white boyfriend's house to pleasure him. Imagine if that was the case. So this is what I'm talking about. 5 legal mistakes no other lawyer's talking about because they don't have the experience. And honestly, I do. But if you want to see more reactions like this, comment below if you think this is right, wrong. What do you think are the top legal mistakes? What do you think's really going on? Is Diddy going to become a hero? Is he going to release Diddy's list? Is Diddy's list the same as Epstein's list? But when it comes to 5 legal mistakes, did I get it right? I want to hear from you on the battle-tested lawyer. Stay legally bulletproof.